He's going to be talking about partnerships and collective initiatives and a place-based approach. So, working on getting your mic up. Okay. Thank you very much, Heath. Round of applause, please.
Thank you, everyone. I'm just trying to regather my thoughts. It's always interesting speaking after Ed. He always has very powerful words to say, and so thank you for those, Ed. Just want to acknowledge, pay my respects to the traditional owners, the land we're meeting on today, the Darumba people, and acknowledge their recent native title determination and congratulate them for that as well. And also look forward to working with their emerging leaders into the future. There's a lot of familiar faces around the room, so those people that know me know that you'll be lucky to get to lunch, quite frankly. My staff fall about when people say, I'm just going to say a few words. You know, I know that's not true. But Jeff will keep me to time. I'm talking to you today about something a bit different, about how do we do some of the stuff that's being talked about and how do we progress the goals and outcomes that we're looking for. There's been a lot of consideration of partnering and place-based approaches and collective initiatives, certainly in the last few years, and there's almost been a bit of a fervour to, partner or perish, which to some degree is true. What I wanted to do today, thanks, Frederica, what I wanted to do today was just talk you through, I guess, some of my experience over the 30 years or so I've been in the social services system. And of course, they are my opinions, not those of my employer or the government per se. But I must acknowledge the opportunity I've had throughout my career with the Queensland Government to learn, experience and study along the way. So let's see if this thing works so far. It's been good so far. There we go. Something's happening.
You've got to press it hard.
Got to press it hard. Okay, thanks for the tip. Look, and again, to define partnerships, they're generally the things that we do together. They can be often very contractual and legally binding. They can be quite informal. And generally, with a partnership, it's about advancing our mutual benefit from that. And we partner with people because there is a mutual benefit in it. Our goals and aspirations will be achieved more easily if we partner with someone or a number of people. They can be a bit limiting at times. They do lack diversity, mostly transactional in nature, but again, can have multiple players. A lot of that benefit exchange in a partnership is actually between the partners, not so much the recipients of service or externally to community. Place-based approaches are simply defined as a range of stakeholders engaging in collaborative processes that address issues within a geographical space or a neighbourhood or a community or a location. Place-based approaches were very sexy 20 odd years ago when community development was big. No one talks about it anymore, but they're coming back into fashion. Government is very good at initiating place-based approaches, and I'll talk to you about maybe some of the limitations I feel about that as we progress. I won't define collective initiatives now. I'll talk to that a bit later as we go along. So when we're looking at do we partner, do we have a place-based approach, do we do things individually, do we look at a more collective approach, there are a few things to take into consideration. Is the problem a tame, relatively simple issue, or is it a wicked problem? For those that have done some work around wicked problems in the past will know the definition, but basically it's they're around those intractable social issues that have no real certitudes, that are moving and shaping and are really difficult and entrenched. So are we dealing with that sort of issue? Are we looking at transacting some business? Are we looking at transforming society or a system generally? Are we really going to engage everyone in this, or just a few? is it a contractual or a tactical or strategic sort of process we want to be involved in, or one that's actually relational? They're the sorts of considerations to consider. And again, picking a collective initiative to attain problem in a transactional way with a few people that's contractual, probably you're going to waste a lot of time and energy, quite frankly. On the other hand, a partnership trying to deal with a really wicked problem and transform the world, probably not the right methodology. So there's lots of other factors: authorising environment, the political environment, the resources available, the capabilities in community, a whole lot of things impact on those relationships as there. And that the relationship in that diagram doesn't hold true all the time. It's not a 100% thing. But when you're starting to consider how am I going to go about dealing with this issue, there are a few things to consider, and that's probably not a bad guide. Traditional coordination and collaboration approaches are generally programmatically conceived, are generally about repairing something or fixing a problem. They're generally driven by imposed solutions, often Gantt charted out, that we know what the answer is already, so we're now going to have a Gantt chart for the next 2 years to plot our progress. I'm not sure we actually can predict the future that well, but apparently we in government do that fairly well. It does create isolated impact as opposed to a more aggregated impact. They are good at aligning silos, not necessarily good at overcoming some of those siloed issues, but good at aligning silos, and probably have a good role in coordinating what is already fragmented effort, where there's lots of people doing lots of things. Bringing them together in a collaborative approach really starts to coordinate that effort. Might still be fragmented, but it's in a more coordinated way. And it does look at measuring outputs, probably more so than measuring the outcomes. We've come a long way with collaboration. I remember doing some work with Robin Keith many years ago, a lecturer at Southern Queensland Uni now, I think, in these days, around networks and coordination and collaboration. And most of the things we said were collaboration in those days were barely coordination, let alone cooperation at times. So again, there's lots of talk about collaboration. We're going to collaborate on this, we're going to collaborate on that. Are we really? Probably not. We might cooperate on this or coordinate around that. Rarely do we actually collaborate. And as I said, the wicked problems are unique and novel, and a lot of the task forces you hear about, particularly when it comes to juvenile crime and all sorts of things, where there's an integrated response and a collaborative task force, all fantastic, but relatively one-dimensional. That everyone is coordinating and collaborating around one direction. Normally with wicked problems, when you apply a little bit of pressure to the problem itself morphs into something a bit different. So if you're stuck on a one-dimensional approach, as integrated as it might be, chances are the problem's moved off into some other space anyhow. So how do you have a more organic approach to that is probably the question. So we need social innovation. And we need more collective impact, that aggregation of effort as opposed to the fragmentation of effort. Easy to say, harder to do, but social innovation is the current new sexy term that's going around. But it is about reconceiving the status quo to create more sustainable and just systems and futures for all of us, for community improving lives. It's not about conjuring up by fairy dust or some other magical process all sorts of weird, wonderful, brand new ideas. It's actually about building upon what's there now. And all the things we've already heard about this morning, I'm sure we'll hear about this afternoon, are the sort of things that we can innovate with and we can develop further. It's, as I said, it's not just creating something from nothing. So collective impact, the collective impact approach, that word's used fairly openly now and quite readily, and again, interchangeably. A lot of people use it for collaboration. It's probably not. The collective impact model is a particularly structured model developed in the US, about how to take a more aggregated view and a collective view to outcomes. Yes, it's about collaboration and it relies on collaboration, but it's not just a collaborative effort. And I'll talk a bit more about the collective impact, Every Child Central Queensland, the collective impact we've got running at the moment. But to diagrammatically represent that people are often working, almost propping up the system at times. There is some role confusion, often in collaborative effort, in place-based approaches. Not quite sure who's doing what, but I think we're all on the right track. Not necessarily an engaged community in that, because it's having things done to it by a group of well-meaning and committed and highly professional people, but it's doing stuff to community, not with community. And often there's a number of these things happening around the place at the same time. So again, you have that fragmentation of effort. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be doing it. What I'm saying is we should be thinking about how we might do it differently or better, because there is lots of great work and great space that people are making here. So we really want to move to something that's drawn a bit differently. That's actually about having people, and particularly service users and community and young people in this case, working in the system with us, rather than people working on those cogs from the outside. Having an engaged community, integrated systems, and you'll see from the different cogs there, mutually reinforcing behaviours. One of the key componentry of collective impact model is mutually reinforcing behaviours. I say that to people and they all look at me like, yeah, we're doing it. Yeah, what's wrong with you, Nick? Come on. When I do it, and when I've done it in the past, and when I look at what's happening, often well-intended actions are working against each other. So how do we truly understand that the things we're doing are mutually reinforcing of what you're doing and what you're doing and what you're doing? It sounds, again, easy to do, a bit harder in reality. The other component there is, in fact, having skilled actors. I refer in the last slide to clumsy heroes. I did write incompetent and took that out because I'm probably one of them. I felt a bit bad about calling myself incompetent, so I just went with clumsy. But having skilled actors, both as doers and active players in the system, and part of the community being involved in this as being skilled actors and fully engaged in the process, is really what it's about. Often we stumble around with our expertise, knowing somehow miraculously what the solution is to the problem, and then imposing that on people in collaborative ways and partnership ways and whatever. But is that really what the community is looking for and the young people are looking for? This was just an example from the Centre for Study of Social Policy, a Washington DC group. Just a different way of, we have lots of Gantt charts and we have lots of hierarchical structures and all sorts of things. This is just a different way of looking at it around what's important to communities. What are the necessary capacities to get where they want to be? How do we make results happen? And there's a box there that I've highlighted because it's a bit hard to read. Communities with capacity to achieve results often do. I think that's something we don't think enough about, that we apparently have all the answers at times. So anyhow, just a different way of the models and partnerships we talk about. There's lots of things happening already in Australia and overseas. Strive Together is a very significant collective impact that's been happening in the US for probably 10 or 12 years now, and are really showing some significant results in school matriculation rates, and young people and families moving out of poverty in some of those really disadvantaged neighbourhoods of Cincinnati and Philadelphia, and some of the promised neighbourhoods as they're referred to in the US. Really good website if you're interested. Have a look at Strive Together. Some fantastic stuff happening in the States. South Australia Together is doing some good things. Mount Druitt, The Hive, and Logan Together here in Queensland. Most of the collective impacts in Australia are relatively young, so it's hard to see the long-term results yet. But if you have a look at some of the US stuff, there's some pretty significant things happening and a lot of money invested. So yes, that Centre for the Study of Social Policy is a good website to have a look at. Taxia, the Australian Centre for Social Innovation is another good one to have a look at. Our Opportunity Child, which is quite a significant sort of meta-collective approach, bringing together actions that are happening in a number of communities. It's a good read. So there's a few things there to have a look at. What we're doing here in Central Queensland is what we've called Every Child Central Queensland, on the premise that every child in Central Queensland deserves every chance to reach their full potential. No kid, a little Murray kid from Woorabinda, an A-grade student at Rocky Grammar, your kids, my kids, our grandkids, our nephews and nieces, every kid has the right to reach their full potential and deserves the chance to do so. And all of us as adults have a responsibility collectively to make that happen. Whether we work with kids and families or we're the soccer coach or whoever, it doesn't matter. We all as adults have a responsibility to give every kid every chance. So that's our sort of universal mantra. Everyone goes, yeah, Mick, sounds good. What the hell are you doing? Good question. What we are doing and what we have done, I'm the chairperson of the board, the Community Leadership Board, and we've recently appointed Rosemary Brown, who's with us here today, as our coordinator. And Rosemary comes to us with lots of experience in New Zealand and down in Logan doing this work and other things, and is helping us start to enact the things we need to do to make every child a fully collective approach. So where does it fit in the scheme of things? It is about social innovation, and it is about building community capacity and community engagement. We want communities to be enabled to challenge the traditional ways of thinking and doing. We want to set the conditions where long-term sustainable change can happen, that is innovative, and the system can change for those families and kids. And we build prosperous futures for our kids. That's what it's all about. We won't necessarily do it all. We will try and help set the conditions where that's possible. And that'll be about facilitating and supporting and helping. A lot of the initiatives are already in place. We're not taking the funding off anyone else. We're not going to be a service deliverer. Part of the idea of collective impact is having a backbone organisation that has some neutrality in the system. It's not a deliverer of health services, not a deliverer of education services. That might just be me, maybe, making those weird noises internally as I'm thinking. It's just the cogs turning, I think. So the thing is about working towards systemic reform and long-term change. We often get a bit distracted by the latest outbreak of sexually transmitted diseases or the latest mental health concerns or the latest child protection concerns or whatever's in the Courier Mail, heaven forbid. We rarely take on the long-term transformational change, things we need to do in our system. And this is what we're on about. We think it's a 10-year plus project, probably longer. We launched it actually in this room about 2 years ago now, and it's taken us 2 years to get the board formed, to get the foundational work happening, to really position ourselves to start taking this forward. So we're thinking long-term, incremental systems change. The basic 5 tenets of collective impact, the model that we're using out of Stanford, is everyone having a common agenda. Doesn't mean we all have to have the one issue we're working on, but the agenda, the list of things, might be a list of common aspirations, an agreed set of actions, a common agenda we're working forward on. As I said, it doesn't have to be we all agree on the same problem, but we do need to agree on what are the big ticket items and how we're going to approach it. Shared measurement data is critical to driving this understanding, because we're talking about incremental behavioural change of the system that's often hard to recognise. So how do we understand the nature of the activities we're doing, and from our point of view as a backbone, how do we understand how our activity is influencing outcomes? Sorry, I should go back to those just to finish those. Mutually reinforcing activities I talked about, continuous communication, and really formalising that to make sure people are talking about the same stuff together all the time. And as I said, having a strong neutral backbone that is a facilitator and supporter as well as being a doer. What it's not, we don't deliver programs, we don't define other groups' goals and strategies, we don't do all the work, thank God. We're not a threat to other people's funding, but we are suggesting that the return on investment that philanthropics or investors or business or us as a taxpayer and government, the return on their investment will be improved if we do the work to set the conditions right for better outcomes and for better activity and more collective effort as opposed to coordination of fragmented effort or isolated impact. So we'll be looking, and we are currently looking for investors to work with us around that, but we won't be in competition with direct service providers. That's not our gig. We don't force our way of working. We do hold people down a bit and struggle with them until they say the right things. No, I'm joking. We don't do that. And we don't take to seek ownership of the issues. We're happy to steward the issues forward, but we don't see any ownership of the issues. So yes, programs, not outcomes. Prove rather than improve. Do more, work better. We don't really want to import ideas. We really want to engage community in the ideas they've got. So we've had a good look around. We've had a look at the data, the health data, a whole range of data sets. We've been out and done forums in communities. We've spoken to a lot of people. We've been at sessions like this before. And there's probably 5 big areas that we think need some attention. Now, these are both issues and opportunities, and I think we've got a great, where we live in Central Queensland is bloody fantastic, and we've got a great future for our kids, but there's a few things that need a bit of attention. That early life period, and we talked about teenage pregnancy rates and low birth weights this morning. Our numbers in Central Queensland are pretty high. That early brain development, first 1,000 days from conception to year 2. There's lots of work happening around re-engaging kids who disengage from school at 13 or 14 or 15. Truth be known, we've probably lost them at kindy. And probably the real truth is we've probably lost them way back in their early brain development somewhere. So we've got a lot of work to do in that space, particularly with a lot of those young teenage mums that we can work with. Skill readiness is the other thing. Speech and language development has come up as one of the real key issues around the forums. I'll show you a slide about that shortly. Community participation and inclusion. Every child should fully participate in community life. Sport, recreation, arts programs, youth groups, church, life. Every kid should be able to participate in that however they want, whether they're poor or not poor. But poverty really prevents a lot of kids, and disadvantage prevents a lot of kids participating. So it is talking with the soccer coaches and the swimming clubs and the recreation facilities and the youth groups about everyone being involved in this. Youth connectedness, unemployment and that transition period of adulthood. Working with Wal and a few others on the community policing board at the moment, and lots of issues around young people disconnected from a whole range of things in life. And then lastly, the area of focus around nurturing families, kids being safe and happy and having nurturing family lives, which sets them up for the rest of their life. And my background in child protection, that's obviously a key focus to me. So they're the big 5 issues, opportunities, areas that we should be paying some attention to, and I know you are. So we're keen to help in those sort of domains. We're probably keen to develop some outcome action groups around those sort of domains and take that work further. Jeff's starting to move in his seat there, and everyone bellies are running. Just quickly, Australian Early Development Census 2015, run every 3 years across Australia. Year 1 teachers doing assessments on 5 domains for kids coming out of preschool into the year 1, social development, speech and language development, reading skills, emotional development, etc. The red column there is vulnerability, the yellow column at risk, and Central Queensland is on that side, which I can't work out what that is on your hand as opposed to my hand. Queensland in the centre and Australia this side. Our numbers, quite frankly, are terrible. Those kids are vulnerable or at risk at that early age. Now, there'll be another one of these come up next year. They're done every 3 years, so 2018 will be another one. This is without denigrating or labelling or shaming any other communities, people will recognise Caboolture, Ipswich and Logan, for example, as three areas of pretty significant disadvantage and a lot of work happening and a lot of expenditure happening on. Rockhampton is the column closest to me, or furthest from me, depending on which side of the room you're on. Caboolture beside it, Ipswich, Logan, Townsville, Toowoomba and Townsville, just as some other comparison of regional centres. Rockhampton numbers are worse than Caboolture, comparable to Logan, and not quite as bad as Ipswich. I wouldn't have guessed that until I'd seen those numbers. And those numbers are around both vulnerability, but the blue column is vulnerability on one category, the red column vulnerability on two categories. So they're pretty bad numbers, quite frankly. So there's work to be done. Covered some of that. This is how we try and work in community, that we offer the core support. We work out there with project teams or alliances or whoever's out there. If there's stuff we can help facilitate and generate, we will. If there are things, dots we can join together, we will. When I say we, I mean Rosemary. But our website's everychildcq.org. I've written that. So have a look at that at some stage. All the info's there. Look, and the take-homes, I guess, are these. That we need to be looking at collective impact, not just the coordination of fragmented effort. We do it all day, every day. We work our butts off. But in reality, there is lots of fragmentation still happening there that we could be doing a lot better. If we can achieve some collective approaches here and engage community in this process, we're a better chance of dealing with some of these issues in the long term rather than being frustrated about here we go again. For those that have been around as long as you've probably done the same interventions over and over again with different generations and cohorts of kids coming through. Engaged, mobilised community, it's not someone else's problem, or that's a health issue, or that's the welfare can deal with that, or it's not my kids. Well, it is. It's all our kids. It's a whole community thing. And we've got to enable and empower community and mobilise community to be part of this, not just say health should be fixing it, or the government should be fixing it, or schools should be fixing it. And lastly, maybe not lastly, having that really diverse range of highly skilled actors, not necessarily, as I said, well-intended, but relatively clumsy heroes. And, whether it be for political power, whether it be for self-interest, whether it be for profit, whether it be for commitment to the mission of our organisation, often we get caught up in our own stuff around this as well. So it's really about stepping back from that, having a range of actors. Forget the words leaders, forget the words doers. Everyone's an actor in this at an equal level, and we all need to be skilled in doing it. So there it is, in as quick a time as I could probably do it, I think. So I think that's it. Yes, that's it. Thanks, folks.